Hello and welcome to Reclaim, Restore, and More, a podcast dedicated to digging deeper into the Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement. We will be highlighting stories from the people who work here and the reclamation projects throughout the states and tribes. My name is Bailey, and I will be your host. Before we start this podcast, I would like to make a disclaimer that this was originally recorded in September of 2021. Thank you for listening. We will be focusing on the Kayenta and Black Mesa mine complex in the Navajo and Hopi Nation of northern Arizona. For a little background, Peabody Western Coal Company operated on the land for nearly 50 years. Opening in 1973, it was a working surface coal mine until August of 2019. It has since been reclaimed and is an active project. To better understand the process it takes to reclaim lands with their communities, I'm going to be talking with the Chief in Support within the Indian Program Branch, Mychal Yellowman. Mychal, could you give us a little bit of a foundation on the part your office and OSMRE play in reclaiming Kayenta Mine?
So I guess to start off with just, I'm going to talk about what SMRE is. SMRE is the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act. It was passed by Congress in 1977, and that begins the regulation of surface coal mining in the United States. It's split into basically, I guess, two sections. There's a Title V and a Title IV. Title V is for active coal mines, and Title IV is for abandoned coal mines. So when the act was passed, one of the things that it did was it was going to take fees from active coal mining that OSM would collect, and then those fees would then be used to reclaim abandoned coal mines that had existed and were abandoned before the passage of the act. So for my branch, we deal with active coal mining. So we're in the Title V section, and then also the section of SMRE that kind of gives our authority on Indian lands is Section 710, and that's the Indian land section. So if you want to look that up, that'll list kind of all the responsibilities OSM has on Indian lands. So not to oversimplify, but basically what SMRE's goal was to require reclamation of surface coal mining disturbance. So it was put in place to ensure that if you were going to mine coal, you needed to have an approved reclamation plan. And the way it did that was through a permit application package. And you'll hear probably this acronym. I'm trying not to use the acronyms, but I might here and there. But we refer to that a lot as a PAP, P-A-T. And again, that's the permit application package. And it's the documentation that supports the federal permit that authorizes a coal company or a permittee to mine coal and to reclaim it.
Yeah, that was a wonderful base. I actually wanted to know if you could define for me the relationship between the Kayenta mine, the Black Mesa, the Hopi tribe, the Navajo tribe, how they're all intermingled in the story and how we're working with them.
Okay, I think the best way to explain it is for OSM and for the Hopi tribe and the Navajo Nation, we refer to the Black Mesa mine and the Kayenta mine kind of as one entity. We kind of have an umbrella term that we use. That term is the Kayenta mine complex. So you'll hear that sometimes when you're talking to OSM or the tribal governments. And what they're referring to, this is a good way to combine both the Black Mesa mine and the Kayenta mine. And I guess some information on that, just the Kayenta mine started its operations in 1973, and they applied for and were issued a SMRE permanent program permit in 1990. The Kayenta mine then ceased producing coal in 2019, and the coal from Kayenta mine went 100% of it went to the Navajo generating station in Page, Arizona. The Black Mesa mine is a little different situation. So the Black Mesa mine does not have a SMACRA permanent program permit. OSM regulates the Black Mesa mine under our initial program. The permittee, in this case Peabody as well, they did make several attempts to get the Black Mesa mine a permanent program permit, but they were litigated each time by environmental advocates. I think the fear from the environmental community was that if the Black Mesa mine had a permit, it would keep on mining. In actuality, if it would have been permitted under the permanent program permit, it would have had more regulations applied to it. That being said, since Peabody was trying to get the Black Mesa mine permitted under the permanent program, they had already started following all of the permanent program regulations, even though they weren't applicable. So at the Black Mesa mine from 1990 on, all of that disturbance, even though it's considered initial program, does meet the permanent program regulations. So again, the way we regulate that is under our initial program, which means it doesn't have a permit, but it does have an approved reclamation plan. And the reclamation plan for the Black Mesa mine is included as an appendices in the Kayenta mine permanent program permit. Does that make sense? There's a lot of information on that one.
Yeah, no, actually that's great. I think honestly that pretty much, as far as we talked about earlier, I think that covers everything, unless you wanted to add something else or felt inspired to talk about something we hadn't kind of touched on.
Yeah, I would like to add just some more, just so people understand how Hopi is involved.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of the Black Mesa mine and the Kayenta mine as two separate entities, the Black Mesa mine is the only mine that has Hopi surface. So the Black Mesa mine is the only mine where Hopi is actively involved as the surface landowner. And there's just over 262 acres that have been disturbed on the Black Mesa mine. All of those 262 acres have been reclaimed except for 65 acres. The remaining 65 acres are for facilities, ponds, and roads that are still remaining there. And the permittee is working with the Hopi tribe to determine what roads, what buildings, what ponds and wells they would like to retain. So that's ongoing right now, and the tribe is working with Peabody on that. So
Okay.
if we look at the Kayenta mine, the Kayenta mine is 100% Navajo Nation surface. However, there are areas within the Kayenta mine where the coal is jointly owned by both tribes. So if you ever look at a map or any of the documentation related to the Kayenta mine on the different coal resource areas, the joint coal areas will be notated by having a J in front of it, such as J19 or J21. And then the areas that are just Navajo coal will have an N in front of it. So it'll say N11 or N9. So that's how we differentiate that. So while it's all within the Navajo Nation reservation boundary, the coal and the minerals are jointly owned by both tribes. So because of that, we do involve the Hopi tribe's mineral department on all permitting activity for the Kayenta mine. And that's just so they're aware of everything, since it is their resources that are being mined in some of those areas. So they get every permit application, bond release, anything that has to do with the Kayenta mine is also given to the Hopi tribe. And they're given at least 30 days to provide comment on those actions.
Okay. Actually, a really quick question from that. Has any of, I guess, working between both of the tribes, I guess, contributed to the delay of anything or made processes more difficult to communicate?
Nothing that we've observed. We work with both tribes as mineral department, and the individuals in each of the minerals department actually work really well together. We do have quarterly meetings with both tribes to discuss all kinds of permitting actions. In some occasions, we've had those meetings together. So I feel like there's a good relationship there with those individuals. Historically, I think there has been some issues with not just Hopi and Navajo, but anytime you have two tribes, working together like that, you can get into some delays, due to, I guess, for lack of a better word, maybe some political processes that they have to go through. But I think in this case, we haven't seen anything that's delayed any of our SMACRA applications. A lot of times the tribes may ask for more than the 30 days if they need to get, review the applications more, and we always work with them on that. But we've never had a delay from each tribe really working together on the SMACRA permitting side. Maybe the only other thing I would talk about is the Hopi Navajo Partition Line.
Mm-hmm.
And just briefly, I mean, there was a whole congressional act that created this partition line. And to summarize it, basically both tribes were at a disagreement on their reservation boundaries. So what Congress did was they eventually stepped in and they expanded some of the area where the Hopi reservation was onto what was the Navajo reservation, but they created kind of a buffer, and they call that the partition line. So that partition line includes Navajo families that had been living on what eventually became the Hopi reservation, and the Kayenta mine sits right on that. So if you look at a map of the mine, you'll actually see it's a horizontal line that cuts through the mine. And that's where it's kind of easy to see with the coal resource areas. You'll see that south of that line, all the coal resource areas are J. And that's because that part of the permit and the lease is in that Navajo Hopi partition line. So in that area, specifically to the Kayenta mine, the surface on 90% of that, or more than 90%, is Navajo, but the coal resources is jointly held by both tribes there, and that's due to that partition line area. So I think that's something a lot of people don't understand about this mine, and I think it kind of makes it unique that, one, it's got two tribes involved, and it's also just got a lot of history on boundaries, land disputes between both tribes historically over that area, and so the mine has a lot of history with that.
Going back a little bit into our conversation, we were talking about SMACRA. And you said something that kind of caught my attention, and that was that there's a duality in that it is responsible for the reclamation of coal mines, but also for coal mining in itself. I find that really interesting.
So in those permit application packages, it'll have background info, it'll have an operations plan, and probably the largest part of that permit application package is going to be a reclamation plan. And so again, OSM approves these permit application packages when they approve the permit. And we really focus on the reclamation part. That's really what we're charged with, is ensuring that these lands are reclaimed to a post-mine land use that is as good as or better than what was there before. So that's kind of the next part I kind of want to talk about, is the post-mine land use is a pretty important part to SMACRA. OSM will approve a post-mine land use that the permittee has to reclaim to. And that post-mine land use is kind of, I guess it's the goal. It's what we are going to judge the reclamation plans for on what's successful and whether they're meeting that responsibility to reclaim. And so with that, there's a lot of deference given to the landowner. And in the case with the landowner, that's whoever owns the surface that the coal mining is happening on. So in the case with Kayenta mine, the Navajo Nation is the surface owner for the entire permit at the Kayenta mine. So the Navajo Nation as defined as the landowner, gets a lot of input on what that post-mine land use is. And they're the ones that we work with directly on any revisions that are going to change the reclamation plan or anything. Again, with the goal being that when the permittee is done with that reclamation, it supports that post-mine land use. So kind of carrying on with that, MACRA then has, I guess what I want to say is a bond release structure for, I guess, determining how successful the permittee is in reclaiming that. So it's a three-phase process. The first phase is for backfilling and grading. The second phase is for topsoiling and establishing vegetation. And then the third phase is for vegetation success and also for a final check on the hydrology, surface and groundwater hydrology, making sure the quality is good, the reclamation is good there. And they go through those processes to get their performance bond back. So another part of getting an approval to mine is OSM will determine a performance bond that's based on the reclamation plan. And it's also based on a worst case scenario, with kind of like the idea that if the permittee didn't do any reclamation and just left, what would be the worst part, that we would have to deal with. And so that bond is used as an incentive to get the permittee to reclaim. So as they reclaim and they meet the standards that we have in the reclamation plan, we can then reduce that performance bond for them. So, and again, that goes through those three phases. The final phase would be us releasing our jurisdiction on that land. And again, we work very closely with the Navajo Nation on those applications. As the landowner, they get a lot of say-so in what is successful out there. So with that, I'm going to kind of go into the permit actions we have. One of them I just mentioned was the bond release. But we kind of have different levels of permit actions, and those would be a minor revision, the bond release, a permit renewal, and a significant or new permit application. For the most part, we typically have, I guess the majority of our work is minor revisions. So those, again, would be a revision submitted by the permittee to make a change to the approved permit application package.
So when you say something like minor revisions, for me, I don't really have a visual in my head of what that would mean for a reclamation site. Could you give me an example of what a minor revision would be?
An example of that might be they need to add a small sediment pond to temporarily catch sediment from their reclamation activities, or they may need to add a temporary road to access a part of the reclamation area so they can lay down topsoil or do some husbandry to the reclamation that's already been done. And so with those, there is no requirement to public notice those revisions. All the revisions, though, are sent to the tribe, to the, in the case of Kayenta, it'll be the Navajo Nation Minerals Department as well as the Hopi Minerals Department. We also send all revisions to BIA and BLM. And they're all given at least 30 days to comment on those revisions. And then the next level would be the permit renewal applications and the bond release applications, and those do require a public notice. And I'll get into the public notice in a little more detail. And then also the significant revisions and new permits would also require public notice. So for the permit renewal, it's fairly administrative. Basically, the burden of proof of not renewing the permit renewal is on OSM. Basically, the company is guaranteed a right of renewal as long as they're doing reclamation contemporaneously. They don't have any outstanding violations. Their bond is adequate, the one I spoke of before. So those are pretty much administrative, but we do public notice on that, and there is a public participation opportunity there. And then for the significant revisions and new permits, those would be for new additional disturbance of significance. So adding a new area to mine coal from to an existing permit would be an example of a significant revision. Or in some cases, the new mining area may just become a new SMACRA permit, so it'd be a separate permit. And those also would require public participation, public noticing, and those projects would be pretty extensive. So those are kind of the level of permit actions that we routinely do. So now I'm going to move on to the government-to-government consultation. Again, we consult with the tribal government as the landowner, and as also in a lot of areas they may have authority over certain aspects of land use and those types of things. So the way OSM is set up is we have mine teams, and we work with tribal representatives, Bureau of Indian Affairs representatives, Bureau of Land Management representatives. We have monthly calls to go over the current pending permit actions. We also go over the inspections that we're doing monthly. We also invite the tribal representatives to our monthly inspections of all our mines. And we also invite the BIA and BLM to those inspections as well. So that's kind of our day-to-day kind of communication with them.
So say the tribes or someone feels like they need to get information or have a more serious conversation, I guess, higher up the line. What does that look like?
If we determine that something needs to go further up the tribal leadership, and I guess leading to a formal government-to-government consultation, we will typically work with the tribal mineral department to determine how to do that. They'll usually help us contact the president to ensure, we are able to set up a meeting with him. And then we have those as appropriate. And then for the public participation, again, as I said, of all the permit actions we have, the minor permit revision is the only one that doesn't have a requirement for public notice. Everything else does. And the requirement that we have for public noticing are the actions that require it is we have 4 consecutive public notices in a newspaper that is local to the area of the mining operation. With the Kayenta mine, that's going to be the Navajo Times and the Navajo Hopi Observer. So we will run 4 weekly announcements notifying of whatever the action is, who to reach out to with OSM if you have questions, and who to send comments to if you also have comments. The public can also request an informal conference on those actions. And when we get a request for that, OSM sets up the conference. We typically do an open house style so people can come and go as they can. We usually aim for 2 to 3 hours. And we'll have our technical staff there to answer questions. We will usually have a Navajo and Hopi interpreter there for any of the language issues that someone might be more comfortable speaking in their native language. And then we'll also have a court reporter there to take comments given verbally, or they can also leave written comments there, or they can send us their comments later. So after the 4th consecutive public notice, the public's given an additional 30 days to provide comments or requests for an informal conference. So that's our SMACRA public participation. In the cases where an action is going to require NEPA documentation in the form of an EA or an EIS, we'll hold additional, public comment, public participation opportunities for those as well. And I think that's about it. I hope I didn't go too fast, but that's kind of the background I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, that was great. I don't think it was too fast, so all good. A lot of what you were talking about was the long-term process, and this mine opened almost 50 years ago. What are some things you're working on right now? Could you explain what phases they are in or what permit level they have reached?
Okay. So the Kayenta mine They ceased mining in August of 2019. So it's in full reclamation. Um, and as of June 16th, 2021, they have reclaimed 90% of their mining disturbance and 72% of their total disturbance. And again, the difference there is we look at the long-term disturbance, which would include roads, facilities, sediment ponds that need to be there for the rest of the reclamation. Those are kind of a little bit separate. So that's kind of why there's two numbers. But for the total disturbance, they've reclaimed 72% of the disturbance out there. So the remaining 28% are, as I said, just the kind of the final pits that they're working on right now, the long-term facilities and the roads. I think one thing to keep in mind too with our reclamation standards. So with MACRA, we have implementing regulations that are in the 30 CFR 700 through 999, I believe. Those regulations actually kind of dictate how the requirements for the reclamation plan. And in an area where you receive less than 26 inches of precip a year, we require a 10-year liability on your vegetation success. So um, in the West, in a lot of these mines that are in arid climates, that's what they're usually waiting for. So there is kind of a lag on that. If they wanted to come in for that phase 3 bond release, it's due to that because they're having to wait that 10 years for that vegetation to establish, and we can monitor it and determine if it is going to be, successful and viable after the operator is gone. So with the Kayenta mine, I guess that's kind of where it's at. There's varying levels of reclamation, throughout the whole area. As far as activities, the kind of the general activities we see on reclamation are the backfilling and grading of the pits. So that's just to put everything back in the pits and get it back to an approximate original contour, meaning it's a surface that mimics what was there before. It's got drainage. It's not eroding. And then they'll topsoil that and then put vegetation on top of that. So again, it's a large mine. There's just a lot of areas that are in different stages of that reclamation. By and large, most of it is done, but they are waiting on that 10-year liability for the majority of it.
Okay. So there are still buildings and equipment that have been left on the property. When will that be removed, and will it?
Yeah, so some of those, I guess the buildings that aren't being used are being dismantled, and that is what they're approved to do for the reclamation plan. However, though, we've been working with the Navajo Nation and the Hopi tribe. Both tribes have requested certain facilities that are on their surface area to stay. And right now, the permittee, OSM, and the tribes are working on that to see what the tribes would like left. I think there's some interest in some of the buildings. They could still be used. Also, some of the roads that are there, the tribe would like to keep them because they are good roads that have been well maintained. So there's a lot of things like that are in discussions right now with the tribal government.
It's interesting to hear how you're participating with the tribe on this. Earlier, you were talking about public notifications, like entries in the local newspapers and committee meetings. Is this still something you're doing, or have you already done them?
Both. So as permit revisions come in, and if they require public notice, those will run as we're processing our review. If we get future applications that fall into those groups, we will do that. The only delay, I guess, that we've kind of had in the last year has just been related to COVID. So there's just been some things where they've been put on administrative delay just due to OSM, I guess, trying to follow the Navajo Nation and Hopi tribes public health orders where they were shutting everything down and not wanting people to travel.
Yeah, I can definitely see how COVID can affect something like this. I think everybody has had something delayed. That must be really a struggle. On another note, How is it decided what vegetation is planted in an area?
Again, in the reclamation plan that OSM has reviewed and approved in the permit, those were done working with the Navajo Nation and the Hopi. So the tribal governments got a lot of say-so in what they wanted to be replanted. We also were looking at what was there prior to mining, a lot of the baseline and background studies. So that's how those were determined. And I guess one thing to keep in mind, the permit application packages that have these reclamation plans, they were originally approved in 1990, right? And over time, they may get revised a little bit. So as these revisions came in, again, we worked directly with the Navajo Nation, especially on something like that, where they're wanting to know what plants they want to come back. And again, for the Kayenta mine, that whole area is approved with a post-mine land use of wildlife and grazing. So the seed mixes that were approved to put back, those were approved by the Navajo Nation, see what they wanted back on that post-mine land after it's been reclaimed. And so those would have been up for public comment when the original permit was being out. We did public notice those. 1990 for some areas, yeah. And then as they were updated, they were deemed to be minor revisions. Again, we've been working with the landowner, which is the Navajo Nation government and the Hopi tribe.
Are there ways for people to access documents like the permit application process?
So the permit application packages are available locally. They're at the Forest Lake chapter, which is near the Kayenta mine. There's copies at the Navajo Nation Minerals Department. There's copies at the Hopi Minerals Department and the Hopi Realty offices. And we have copies here in Denver. We also maintain a scanned copy. The Kayenta permit application package is a large permit, 40 volumes. Each volume's a 3-ring binder. So it's a large document with a lot of information in it. So when we do get requests for it, we always try to walk the person through it, so that they understand where to go, where they're looking. A lot of times we'll send them the electronic copy, but we're also trying to, I guess, help guide them through it, because it is a lot to go through. It's a lot to digest and understand. It's 30 plus years of material that's in there. So it's something we try to do. We are trying to make it accessible online more, but we've noticed that it's probably better to have people reach out to us. We can provide them the electronic copy. We can work with them, because on its own, people would get lost in it. It's a very large, detailed document.
I was wondering, what is the next step for the Kayenta mines?
I guess what we would call the final reclamation, as we were talking, as they work with the tribal governments on what long-term facilities the tribes would like to keep. Those will start to get reclaimed. And then it's just going to be bond release applications, as I discussed earlier. As the reclamation goes through that 10-year liability period, they're eligible to start coming in for bond release applications. And again, those are noticed locally in the area. The people that are living within the lease area and the permit area, they're notified by the permittee of these bond releases. That's probably going to be the majority of the work now. The disturbance from mining is all done. It's just all being reclaimed right now. And again, with a lot of input from both Navajo and Hopi.
Well, that about wraps us up for our first podcast. Mychal, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me about the Kayenta mine. I appreciate it. For those of you at home, thank you for tuning in. If you are interested in learning more about Kayenta Mine and the Black Mesa Mine, then please check out our Kayenta and Black Mesa Mine Open Virtual Information Conference on our website at www.osmre.gov. Thank you for listening, and have a great rest of your day.